Hala Saeed is a professor of media studies at the American University in the Emirates. Her upcoming book is called Twitter Diplomacy in the Age of Media Polarization, and she joins us now from Dubai. Great to have you with us. Now, firstly, there are, legitimate concerns about human rights in the UAE and about Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen. Why shouldn't the free Western media give these concerns coverage?
The main objective of the Saudi-led coalition under the name Operation Decisive Storm against the Houthis was to restore the Yemeni legitimate government based on Article 51 of the UN Charter. We all know that. But in their coverage of the war in Yemen, news media such as CNN and BBC have focused extensively on the humanitarian crisis without mentioning Houthi use of civilians as human shields, or the fact that they have been found to restrict the deliveries of food aid in areas under their control. We know all how militias are using innocent civilians as a human shields, but these are not explained in the Western media. Both CNN and BBC ignore the importance also of the security issue to the Saudi-led coalition and oversimplified the cause of the conflict as only a proxy war between Shia Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia. Well, the main issue is security. So the Saudi-led coalition will not accept an armed state militia such as Hezbollah in control of neighboring country with which it shares almost like 1,500 kilometers border. The conflict is not, the media doesn't show that the conflict is not simply a Sunni-Shia rivalry. It's like more than that. It is a conflict over legitimate statehood versus a revolutionary militia destabilizing the whole region. So that's the main thing that the mainstream media is lacking. They're not showing the whole picture. Nobody wants a humanitarian crisis, of course, even the countries who are like in this war, but they are here like protecting themselves and protecting their national security, and the mainstream media is not showing the whole picture. That's why it is biased and it is not really inclusive, in other words. What? So the main, I just want to briefly say that the lack of bipartisan agreement in British and American politics regarding the danger of non-statehood armed militia is reflected in the media. So liberal in the West, whether in politics or in the media, have failed to understand or accurately report that the Saudi-led coalition views political Islamists such as Iran and its militia as gateway to extremism. So supporting them means indirectly supporting radicals and terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda or the Houthis, because they all belong to the same extremist ideology. So that's the main thing that the mainstream media is not showing, because it is actually reflecting those parties, the views of those political parties.
But I just wanted to say, perhaps it's because Saudi Arabia and the UAE are allies of the West, that they are subject to more harsh criticism in the media. But I also want to talk about how those leaders are turning to Twitter to counter the narratives in the mainstream media. Has that been effective?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, how this book was analyzing the tweets in order to reach to your question, whether it is effective or not. It's more complicated than that. The book have analyzed the tweets of Emirati and Saudi diplomats. Diplomats means, according to the Twitter diplomacy terminology, is diplomats or political leaders using Twitter. And the study in the book have analyzed the tweets of those diplomats quantitatively and qualitatively in order to show the influence of Twitter diplomacy in both countries. And the influence is basically of those tweets was determined by the number of interactions on the Twitter, as well as their coverage in the American and British media. So basically, the influence was determined how many tweets are basically published in the American and British media, and also it analyzed how the tweets were covered in the media in terms of positive or negative or neutral stance. It also compared the framing of the tweets in the media against the sentiment of the public on Twitter to the same tweet. So regarding your question, the conclusion was two diplomats with the most followers and greatest number of tweets are not necessarily the most influential, especially when it comes to the four political issues covered by the study, which is the Qatar crisis, the war in Yemen, Iran, and the Muslim Brotherhood. So there's a big, and also in order to say influential or not, okay, there's a huge difference between the coverage of the mainstream media of those tweets and the conservative media. That's why it is called polarization, because there's a polarization between the left and the conservative media in the United States and the United Kingdom, and how they covered the tweets of Emirati and Saudi diplomats. The mainstream media is more aggressive towards the political stance of those two countries than the conservative media. And at the end, the conclusion was saying that Twitter diplomacy is not sufficient enough to combat the attacks of the mainstream media. It needs more than that.
Okay, so Twitter can be a bit of a double-edged sword, can't it? Because Donald Trump was by far the most influential political leader on Twitter. But many say that, you know, his unfiltered opinions, shall we say, actually cost him the election. How to counter that?
Well, first of all, let us be here more accurate in this point. Trump didn't lose the election because of Twitter. If that was the case, he and his supporters will not be blocked from Twitter if it is not that influential and it was backfiring. He lost elections for other political reasons. We know that. Donald Trump was basically politically incorrect. And that was one of the reasons why he's popular among his supporters and hated by the diplomatic and political arena. So he used the social media and mainly Twitter to bypass the traditional codes of the diplomatic conduct and the language of political communication. So basically, that's why Donald Trump, even after he got elected, he wasn't using his official POTUS account and was using his personal Twitter account in order to have more freedom in his language and not to be restricted by diplomatic language. So basically what he said, it was infuriating the diplomatic arena and political arena, but but his supporters were happy about that. So Trump explained from the very beginning, since 2016, and he was saying if the press could cover me accurately and honorably, I would have used the Twitter much less. So he basically was saying that I'm using Twitter because I'm not covered fairly. So it is like a sub. He's not like a big fan of it. So that's the main reason.
Dr. Najat Al-Sayed, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.